Are we live, Stephen? Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Double Down, the live news and affairs programme that puts people first. It's Thursday the 11th of March 2021. We're broadcasting live from Dundalk and Dublin, and I'm your host Finbar Markey. Welcome to the show, folks. Another week has passed and hopefully we're a week closer to getting back to normality. On tonight's show, we're joined by Martin Condon to talk about cannabis decriminalisation, and we speak with Pat Cote, a Californian self-described hard-left member of the Democratic Party. We talk to Pat about Biden's election win, disappointment and division in the Democratic Party, and the cancel culture. Before talking with our guests, let's look at some of the news that you won't see on TV this week. In Irish news first, it's been revealed that the central bank will not be sending a criminal file to the Gardaí in relation to the Davy stockbroker insider dealing scandal. The central bank have finished a probe that has proved insider trading in one instance, although the breadth of the original probe has been limited. The scale of the fraud, as well as the central role of Davy in Irish state finance, has caused scandal, but little else, as the central bank has declared they will not be seeking a criminal investigation. Okay, in more Irish news, and a bill has been brought forward in the Houses of the Oireachtas this week by Sinn Féin. The bill relates to the rights of adopted people to get access to their birth certificates. It has been predictably shot down by the government in an intervention to ensure that the bill will not obtain the necessary level of political support. Roderick O'Gorman, the Green Party axeman on behalf of the government on social matters, has stated that the government will not support the bill as it intends introducing a bill of its own, but has given no clear timeline of when that bill will be published. The mother and baby home campaigners and adopted persons' rights groups have said that the current system of denying people their basic information continues to add to the cover-up of scandals and abuses that have taken place in religious and state homes in the past. Turning to UK news, and damning evidence has emerged proving unequivocally that the British government has been paying large media firms to spread misinformation and propaganda at target states with the intention of causing political destabilisation. Documents leaked to journalists by online activist group Anonymous show how the British government's Foreign and Commonwealth Office paid the likes of the BBC, Reuters and Bellingcat and others to identify and groom journalists in target countries to spread disinformation and stir civil unrest. Russia is one of the states targeted most in this campaign by the UK's Foreign and Commonwealth Office. The campaign targets media firms using covert operations towards attitude change in those countries, aiming towards regime change. Some of these operations have involved multi-million-pound contracts. Jenny Varacker, spokesperson for Reuters, has confirmed the authenticity of the leaked documents. In Germany, it's been revealed that Chancellor Angela Merkel's centre-right bloc has been rocked by COVID corruption, as MPs announced they were resigning, saying that they had personally profited from government deals with regards to procuring PPE. Nicolas Lobel announced on Sunday that he was retiring from politics after it emerged that his company that he owned had earned €250,000 from commissioning as a middleman PPE. In the UK and across the EU, scandals involving the procurement of PPE have revealed that as most people looked on at the collapse of their economies, some people who were paid to limit the damage in fact looked after themselves first. In US news, President Biden has issued a statement condemning the International Criminal Court's recent decision to investigate Israel for war crimes. In a paltry and mean-spirited statement, President Biden regurgitated Israeli complaints regarding the ICC decision and stated that the United States remains committed to investigating international atrocities. They did not mention how or what mechanism would be used for those investigations. In the Middle East, Syria and Russia have bombed illegal markets selling oil in eastern Syria. These markets were used by Islamic militants and mercenaries to sell oil on behalf of Israel, Turkey and other states. It's thought that the money used from the sale of stolen oil goes towards arming and bankrolling Islamic extremists in the region to do the bidding of larger states. That's all the news that you won't see on TV this week, folks. I'll be joined later on by Californian Pat Cote to discuss politics and in particular the Democratic Party, the division and the schism in the Democratic Party and cancel culture. But before talking to Pat, I'm joined by Martin Condon, a qualified herbalist and an activist campaigning for the decriminalisation of cannabis. Are you there, Martin? Can you hear me? Are you on mute there by any chance, Martin?
Sorted. Apologies.
We have you now. What's the crack? How are you, Martin? Thanks for joining us this evening.
Very good, yeah. Thanks very much for having me.
No problem at all. Martin, we'll get down to brass tacks. I want to talk about the decriminalisation of cannabis in Ireland. It's something that's happening around the world, and there's a lot of people talking about it. Before we have a chat to you in detail about this campaign, are you representing any groups tonight or just yourself?
Well, I'd be representing myself, but also the Patients for Safe Access. It's another group that I'm a director of, along with Kenny Tynan, Martin O'Brien, and Alicia Maher, who's both of those people are medical cannabis patients in Ireland. And Martin O'Brien is a Corkonian who had to leave Ireland many years ago, but he's running a cannabis farm now in America. And we've set up the Patients for Safe Access to give patients a better voice and to be better represented in Ireland for better access to cannabis, because currently they're being really, really let down by the government.
Is there much of a campaign in Ireland? You see stuff on Facebook and things like that, but in terms of government action or lobbying to the government, I haven't noticed so much of that. Is there a solid campaign at the moment?
Yeah, there's certainly, and I suppose no pun intended, but there's a very much a growing campaign in Ireland around cannabis, and it's growing every day. And we've a bill coming very soon from Gino Kenny. It should be before the government by the summertime, and that bill is seeking to legalise cannabis for adults 18 and over. I'd imagine. I haven't seen the contents of the bill yet, so I don't know what's actually in it. But yeah, there certainly is a massive support there now currently for adults to get access to cannabis in Ireland. Even though a recent poll done by Red FM, 3,500 people took part in that poll, and Red FM is a local radio station here in Cork City, and 86% of people who took part in that poll voted in favour of cannabis to be legalised in Ireland.
That's a significant amount of people, all right. In terms of, if I were to ask you in 4 or 5 sentences, in a nutshell, if it's possible, to lay out your stall in relation to your beliefs around cannabis decriminalisation, would you be able to do that?
Yeah, I could. It's not the government's place to tell me what I can and cannot do with my body. They're doing more harm to our society by doing so. They've enabled criminal gangs to, grow and all of that. So I suppose that's much more than 4 words. But again, I suppose just to start what I said, it's not the government's place to tell me what I can and cannot do with my body.
It's as simple as that for you, is it? You don't get into too philosophical about it.
That's just to put it out simply, like you were kind of saying in 4 words less. Yeah. But that's to put it out. We could go on like very deeply. As I said, that this prohibition around drugs has enabled criminal gangs like the Kinahans, the Hutches, and you'd all those gangs that were going on in Dublin or in Limerick, all over Ireland. There is no town, city, village that's unaffected by the war on drugs. And it's not the drugs that bring devastation to communities. It's the prohibition around the drugs that brings the devastation to communities. You see young people getting shot. They're not getting shot because of drugs. They're getting shot because of the war on drugs, because of the prohibition around drugs. Currently, you don't have young kids getting shot because of the sale and supply of alcohol or tobacco on our streets. And these are drugs too. So again, it comes down to the prohibition around these other drugs that causes this devastation within our communities. So my beliefs, while it started around cannabis, I believe we have to end the criminalisation of all drug users. I believe all drugs should be decriminalised and access to them being given to the people who wish to use them. There's people out there who use drugs on a daily basis or responsibly, and they don't develop addictions. And I don't believe many people who use drugs develop addictions. I think the number is about 10% of people who use drugs develop addictions. So 90% of people who use drugs can do so responsibly. And when we prohibit them, we create all this kind of warring that goes on.
I think the word responsibly maybe is a key there. I saw a little meme on Facebook today that said the gateway drug is trauma. And that would link very much into the work of people like Gabor Mate, which maybe we'll discuss on another program. There are some pillar arguments against the decriminalisation of cannabis and arguments that have been used for a long time. So I'll lay some of those in front of you, if you don't mind, Martin, and if I could hear your response to them. Cannabis contributes to mental ill health and is a major contributor to schizophrenia, and in particular paranoid schizophrenia. What's your response to that?
Yeah, I suppose we could look at tobacco as one example around schizophrenia. It was kind of standing out that there was a lot of schizophrenic people who were smoking tobacco. And what they later found out in studies is that those people were actually self-medicating. So what they found is actually, no, the tobacco doesn't cause schizophrenia because all the schizophrenics were smoking tobacco. It's actually, these schizophrenics were actually self-medicating and they didn't know how. So again, when we look at other drugs then, and there's people who might develop abuses around those drugs or bad drug habits, irresponsible drug use, a lot of that stems from mental health use or mental health problems. And yeah, a lot of the times drugs, they're the easy thing to point at and blame. But in reality, it's the environment in which that person grew up, maybe parents who failed them, society, a system. Many failings of young people lead to people making poor decisions around their drug use and drug habits. So again, it comes back to the end of prohibition, have sensible adult conversations, and we can educate young people around how to use drugs responsibly and sensibly, because it can be done.
Yeah, I think a study that you could be referring to the same study that was, it's a very recent study that broke that myth that cannabis contributes to schizophrenia or causes schizophrenia, but rather that people with schizophrenia seek out cannabis, which was the finding of that major study. But I think my own experience, having worked in social care and social work for many years, was that when somebody does find that cannabis, if they're not seeking help for their condition, the cannabis over time can actually contribute to worsening the condition, is what I've experienced. But the cannabis is not the contributing factor in itself. Traumas and childhood issues and things like that.
But when you look at that person, when in that instance with the schizophrenia, again, it's not helped when they're getting it from an unregulated source. They don't have any idea if it's a high THC or a low THC, if there's any CBD or anything in there. So again, even these people with schizophrenia who do develop problems, is that problem actually caused again because they're not getting proper information about what they're consuming? Like it'd be the equivalent of, are you drinking a Budweiser? Are you drinking vodka? Are you drinking Bud Light? Because these have all varying strengths and varying effects. So again, we go back to the prohibition. The best way to protect these people with schizophrenia or mental health issues would be having a quality assurance and more information there at the point of purchase.
Okay. What about the idea that cannabis is a gateway drug? It's the starting point towards harder drugs.
Yeah, again, like there's no evidence there to support that cannabis is a gateway drug. There is nothing within cannabis that makes you want other drugs. A lot of the times, people who go from cannabis to other drugs, that starts actually with a mental health or an environmental issue, where the cannabis isn't delivering the escape that they're looking for, so that they go on to the next thing. So again, that's a mental health issue, and you could even look at prohibition then as well around the cause of people going from cannabis to other drugs. You go to an illegal drug dealer to get your cannabis, well, guess what? That guy has other illegal drugs, so if you're at all tempted, well, it's easy to get to him. Whereas if you go to, say, a regulated store in America at the moment, and you get cannabis there, I would very much doubt that there's cocaine or other illegal drugs being sold from that premises. If it's a cannabis store, they're going to sell cannabis. Whereas currently in Ireland, if you go to get cannabis, you're offered benzos, cocaine, and all sorts of other drugs.
I was the Merchant's Key Drug Project when I was at college years ago. A guy came down to talk to me. I talked to the class about drugs, and he said that the gateway drug was in fact prescription drugs that parents would have lying around the house, and it was quite often the first type of a drug that people would use. So again, but Martin, is it all about ignorance? Is the continued criminalization of cannabis purely about ignorant legends and myths, or do you think there's other reasons why it's been criminalized?
No, I definitely think there's a lot of ignorance involved. Again, you look at the recent responses within the Dáil when our drugs minister was asked by Gino Kenny around the idea of legalising cannabis. And he responded with this kind of, oh no, we're going to take a health-led approach. We can't decriminalise cannabis because that will de facto lead to legalisation. So currently our health minister is ignoring the evidence that's coming from other places around the world that legalising and regulating cannabis is beneficial for the society, and it creates a safer environment for kids to grow up within, and it takes away from the criminal enterprises who make so much money off of this. So, again, it's a lot of problems caused by prohibition, really.
Are you aware of any lobby groups that would be actively lobbying to maintain the criminalisation of cannabis? I'm just trying to figure out, you hear there's lots of legends, I suppose you might call them, of why it was originally criminalised, going back to King John, but then back in the 1930s with regards to the paper industry. Currently, are you aware of any lobbying by any industries to maintain? Because it's obvious that it could be an industry in itself in Ireland. But is there any industries lobbying against it?
This is an interesting one, because actually I'm not aware of ones actively lobbying against cannabis legalization in Ireland. But what is going on here in Ireland is there is outside bodies are lobbying our government at the moment for cannabis legalization. But again, they're doing it in a very much a way in which it's more beneficial to the capitalists rather than it is to the citizens. So again, they don't want to see us with an ability, say, to grow your own cannabis plants out the back garden, because again, that would make it more difficult for these guys to sell you cannabis if you can grow it yourself. So at the moment, I'm actually much more worried about the lobbying that's going on in favor of legalizing cannabis, because there's a lot of money that me and my other buddies here that are activists and long-time campaigners just to end this whole criminalization. It's money we don't have and we can't match. And I don't like to think of what might be done if the cannabis community around Ireland doesn't really get together and stand up and fight for a right to grow this plant and to have access to it, and not to be treated like second-class citizens because of it. When you go back to Luke Flanagan's bill, when he published that and put it before the Dáil before, there were still things within that, like they still criminalised young people for getting caught with cannabis. Whereas if a young person is caught with alcohol at the moment, there is no law that young person is breaking. That young person just gets brought home by the guards. Whereas under Luke Flanagan's bill back in 2013, no, we criminalised that young person. And even the adults, if you got caught with more than an ounce of cannabis, you would get criminalised. It's like, what are you trying to say? That if I have more than an ounce, that I'm a criminal, that I'm engaged in the illegal selling of cannabis? Is that what they're suggesting? Why don't they suggest this with cigarettes? If I wanted to go down and stock up on 1,000 Johnny Blues tonight and buy them, and the guards come and kick in my door, they're not going to do me for illegally having Johnny Blues. There's no law I'm breaking there by possessing those Johnny Blues. There's going to be government levy. That's all they're worried about, is their taxes. Again, it comes back to the money that's going to be made in this. Whereas I'm fighting on this from the humanist point of view, as to undo the harms that were done to me. I'm coming at it from that point of view. I've lived through what is prohibition and the effects of it. And I don't want to see that done. Whereas there's other guys now currently lobbying the government, and all they're interested in is money. And we all know money is not good. It's the root of all evil.
Yeah. Is there, I won't say a contradiction, but is there something that still needs to be ironed out in the argument with regards to, on the one hand, decriminalisation versus legalisation? Decriminalisation not applying rules, legalisation applying rules. Because on the one hand, earlier on you were saying that if it was decriminalised and regulated, that young people would be able to obtain it in a safe environment and things like that, which would mean you'd have to apply some rules to it. You'd have to legislate in some way for it if you were going to create that safer environment. So it may be a case that it's, and this is just throwing it out there, that it's not about having no legislation at all, but it's about having legislation that doesn't impinge upon the individual's freedom to access and to use and to possess cannabis. But maybe some legislation may be required of some sort.
Well, similar to what we do with tobacco and alcohol. We legislate for tobacco and alcohol under the Public Health Act. We don't have an Alcohol Control and Regulation Act. We don't have a Tobacco Control and Regulation Act. At least I'm not too aware of these. The bills that govern and regulate alcohol and tobacco come under what I'm aware of is called the Public Health Act. Can we not just slip cannabis in there and regulate it under the Public Health Act? And again, as I say, if a young person gets caught with cannabis, is it not better that cannabis was either organically grown by their uncle out the back garden or acquired from a legal premises and have an equality assurance and all of that stuff put in place? Isn't that better that young person gets it there? Whereas it's currently what they're getting is it from the illegal market where it's sprayed with things like fiberglass and all of this stuff. So again, the young people, if they get caught with cannabis, they need to be brought home to their parents. And again, they need to be protected by the government by putting in place proper regulations, yes, rules in place to ensure that. And again, as I say, like if it is their uncle growing it out the back garden organically, if that uncle was brewing beer and their nephew stole a couple of bottles of beer, would we bring that uncle to jail, to court for that if that young person stole their beer? We wouldn't. But currently, previously in Luke Mean Flanagan's bill, actually we would come down very hard on that parent or that uncle or that family member if that was their cannabis and it was proved that it was their cannabis that fell into the hands of that young person. Again, this is discrimination around the substance because we don't do this around alcohol and tobacco. So again, we look at these.
Is there an argument to be made that the criminalisation of cannabis causes mental health problems, or at least existential issues in the development of people's personalities? And what I mean by that is, if there's a young person growing up and maybe they don't like alcohol, they don't want to get involved in hard drugs, but they like a smoke of cannabis, because it's illegal and because they are automatically have a criminal label put upon them, some young people visualize themselves as outside of society because they have a preference for cannabis? And does that impact how they participate in life and the connectedness that they may have had with society and community if their preference for cannabis was not criminalized? I'm not sure if you get my point with that.
I do indeed, and I 100% think you're spot on. It most definitely would cause that to young people, and I've seen that happen, and I've even had that happen to me. For a while, when I first got stopped and searched by the guards, like I much had a dislike towards the guards because of the way in which they treated me. And I seen it with my friends, my cousins and stuff like that. When they were treated like criminals, they started believing they were criminals, and then it blurred the lines between other criminal behaviour, so it made it easier for them to engage in this. Like even currently as it stands now for myself, I've an honours degree in herbal science. I'm currently doing a master's in bioanalytical chemistry. But I could tell, if there was a job opportunity came up and I had to apply, I would have all sorts of things going on within my head, telling myself that I'm not worthy of this job because I'm a criminal, that I have a criminal conviction, and that if there's going to be somebody else apply for this job who doesn't have that criminal conviction, they're going to get preference to me. And a lot of the jobs today, they do ask on the job application sheets that you send in, because there's just so many people applying for jobs now. It's a very tough market to get a job. So of course they're going to choose the person who doesn't have a conviction over that. So that has heavily influenced me and how I go about my day to day. Even the fact that I'm here now speaking to you, I'm 31 years of age, but this started when I was 17. Like my whole mental, my whole life has been affected by this. The direction it's taken has been changed by this. I wake up every morning thinking, how can I go about legalizing cannabis today? How can I go about fighting for my good name to be restored? Because I currently have convictions for possessing cannabis, and I don't believe I need to be labelled as a criminal in today's society. So yes, like it has affected me. I kind of, as I say, wake up every morning early, and that's within the first few thoughts. What's on the agenda today in terms of fighting to undo the harms that were done to me?
Okay. Are we any closer now to decriminalisation than we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago?
I think we're very close to it, yeah. I don't have much faith in the current government as it stands, but I do have faith if people get up and stand up and fight for their rights. The government, we could force the hand, So I don't know if you're aware of, but I engaged in some civil disobedience protests there in January and February, and there's one planned for this month as well, where I went into the Garda station with cannabis and a cannabis plant in the Valentine's Day protest to challenge the law. I'm asking for my day in court. I would like to go to court and challenge the legitimacy of the law as it stands, because I don't think there's any justification currently for the law as it stands. The Misuse of Drugs Act, how have I misused cannabis? Like, prove or justify to me that I've been misusing cannabis, and I might kind of give legitimacy to the law. But as I see it, there is no legitimacy, there is no justification for it. As I said, that the results of this prohibition, this war on drugs, has been our communities have paid for it. The biggest benefactors of the war on drugs are the politicians, who get to gloat about being hard on the drug dealers, hard on the drug users. Do you know that we're locking people up? You know, that the Gardaí, they're big benefactors of the war on drugs, because they get to put out their posts, their tweets, their numbers at the end of the year, the statistics, their arrests, you know, all their numbers, it all adds up. They're benefiting from it because it's seen as they're doing a good job, because they're generating numbers. Again, our media are big benefactors from the war on drugs, because anytime there's a big raid, anytime there's a drug bust, anytime there's a bit of a story around drugs, they'll focus on it. They'll get the headline piece, the clickbait, people will click on it, and a lot of the times they'll only ever report on the negative around drug use. You'll very rarely see a report in the media around a woman is cured of or has symptoms of PTSD reduced drastically because of access to psychedelic therapy. You won't hear that reported. They'll only report on the bad, because the bad gets clicked on more.
I've come across cases of young people who became involved with Garda Síochána and over possession of small amounts of cannabis, and they ended up, the Gardaí in question tried to involve them in becoming informers on other issues using the small possession of cannabis. So it may not only be targets that they're trying to reach. At times they can use young people's fears of criminalization to access information in the community. Just in relation to you're trying to get arrested to get a case going in relation to being charged for misuse of drugs, you may be aware that Mark Fitzsimmons, an activist who happens to be blind, who used to he's become a father now, he's not doing so much now. He was a cannabis activist. He went into Dundalk Garda station with some cannabis, and they refused to arrest him. He went in with a Times reporter, and the Gardaí all hid in the back of the Garda station and wouldn't come out to deal with it. He then took up an entire cannabis plant to Garda Síochána. He was arrested at that point, but no case came of it. But he was informed that he might be better to take some kind of a judicial review of the process, as opposed to because if you just go into a normal criminal court, they'll say, listen, that's for the houses of the Oireachtas, or it's for the Supreme Court. It's not for this court to make a decision on that. Listen, we're really running out of time here, Martin. I could really talk to you. I do want to get you and some other representatives back on the show to go into more detail. This is just maybe an opening up of the subject matter, and to go into more detail in the future. But if people want to get some more information now about campaigns that are happening in the country, where would they go to?
Yeah, you can check out Martin's World. It's a podcast that I do myself. It's on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter, and Twitch, all over the internet, really. And also there's Patients for Safe Access. It's not a great place for people to go if there are patients out there, if you believe that you might benefit, or if you have been benefiting from cannabis, or if you are not able to get access to it. We would like to hear from you. We would like to bring your story forward and have a heard, so we can get better access to patients, because they need it, they deserve it. Okay,
Martin, thanks for coming on, and we'll speak to you soon again, I hope.
Thanks very much. Bye. Have a nice evening.
Thank you, Martin. Last night, or this morning I should say, at 3 a.m, we interviewed Pat Cote, who's a member of the Democratic Party, a self-declared or self-styled hard left campaigner within the Democratic Party. I've been following Pat for a while on Twitter. He's a very interesting guy. He doesn't take any crap, and he's not very happy with Joe Biden and the Joe Biden clique in the Democratic Party at the moment, and all of the promises that they've broken, and also the development of cancel culture, both in the United States and around the world. So we spoke to Pat very early this morning. We pre-recorded, so we're going to play that video now. If you're liking what you're seeing with this show, by the way, we don't have a normal backdrop, by the way. We don't have a normal setup. I'm not in the studio tonight, unfortunately. If you're liking what you're seeing, give this show a share now. We're going to get some real in-depth inside views of what's happening in the Democratic Party in the United States, and it's not what you'll see on TV. Do you want to roll that, please, Stephen? I'm joined by Pat Cote from California in the United States to give us some real insight into what's happening now in United States politics. It seems that things have gone a little bit quiet since Donald Trump left the scene. But if you scratch below the surface, you might find that there's a lot of dynamic and activity happening. Pat is a social commentator, a political commentator, a citizens journalist and an activist. I would describe him from watching him over the last few months in particular as economically progressive in terms of his politics. Pat, would I be right in that description?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a hard left progressive is what we would call ourselves here. I know every country looks at that differently, but yeah, I support policies that benefit average everyday people over the wing of the Democratic Party that supports corporations every bit as much as the right wing Republican Party. So
okay.
Absolutely.
So before we get into any serious questions, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, great to be here. Thank you for getting up for this.
Oh, no problem. It's just after 3 a.m. here, but you've had a busy day, and I can tell that you had to move slots around to get talking to us today. Pat, let's get stuck into the questions while the internet connection is going well. Watching mainstream media, both in Ireland and the EU and in the United States, so the likes of CNN, MSNBC, channels like that, you would think that, Donald Trump, the man who created all wickedness and evil in the world, is now gone, and everybody's just happy as Larry in the United States. Was that a fair analysis?
It is if you watch MSNBC and CNN, but it's not outside of that world. I wouldn't say people are overjoyed. There is a relief for sure by the general population that Trump is gone. But there's a fear from progressives and people on the left that there's a lot of complacency coming, and we know who Joe Biden is, and we're very worried that his grandpa demeanor and kindness, which is in contrast to Trump, is going to cover up a lot of the similar policies and it's a shield in a way. So progressives are very worried that people are falling asleep because, we don't have that devil to fight against that we had in the past with Trump. So, the people that are considered centrists in the party in U.S. politics, in the Democratic Party, they're very happy with the economic policies of Trump, regardless of what they say. It's the social issues they were against. So they are going to very much fall asleep, and we're very worried that because of that, it's going to be difficult to pass progressive policy.
It reminds me a little bit of Hannah Arendt, who had escaped the concentration camps, became a great philosopher before it, indeed, and she spoke about the banality of evil. Now, I'm focusing on the word banality here as opposed to evil, but the idea that the more banal you are, in many respects, the greater system and institutions of self-interest you can create, or even, as she was describing, evil, without people batting an eyelid, because it just looks so normal, just average people going to work and nobody knows what they're actually working on, kind of a thing, and the same with Joe Biden. It seems that if you scratch below the surface of the Democratic Party, there is significant division, and there's a schism, if you want to use that archaic religious word. There seems to be a schism happening in terms of economically progressive people, because it is coming down to, sometimes it appears to me that the social issues are just smoke and mirrors that are created there, the differences, but it's really down to economics, isn't it? And that the economic promises that were made prior to the election, and then even prior to inauguration, have been broken the next day, which we experience all the time here in Ireland too. Could you maybe elaborate on that schism? Is there a schism, first of all, and could you elaborate on it?
Yeah, there absolutely is a schism. We've got two wings of the party. There's a corporate wing, which we call the centrist in general, and then there's the left wing, which is we label the progressives. So what you've got, Joe Biden, his campaign promises were made to appeal to both wings of the party. So, he promised $2,000 out the door immediately as payments to people suffering through COVID, one-time payment. Immediately after winning the election, that was changed to $1,400 instead of the $2,000. And his promise was immediate.
That was a big bat that he was hitting Trump with, wasn't it, as well? This $2,000 check. That's the bat that he created.
Right. And there's no doubt that won the election for two of the senators in Georgia. Two Democratic senators won their Georgia races because of that promise. It was clear as day that they won because of that. So because of that, the Democratic Party gained a tie in the Senate, which is essentially a majority because the vice president breaks the ties. So for the Democratic Party to backtrack on that simple promise immediately is a big mistake. And, the midterms are 2 years away from now, and most likely the Democrats will lose in the midterms because of a lot of their unfulfilled promises. So that is a real problem that 2 years from now, there's a chance we won't be able to pass any sort of legislation on the left, and the Republicans will regain the Senate, which will basically put our whole government in standstill again, with no legislation being able to be able to pass.
But the irony is that currently they're in the best position, the Democratic Party, that they've been in decades in terms of being able to bring from beginning to end a straight flow of policy through, and they've made so many commitments. When we look at the campaign and the Biden campaign, it wasn't a Biden campaign, it was a Bernie campaign, and Biden just happened to hop in there at the end. But in terms of the energy, in terms of the sense of creating a shared future, that wasn't coming from the centrists or the corporates, as you describe them. It was coming from a camp now that seems to be isolated to a large degree and being put down on by the Democratic Party. Would I be right in that assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's no doubt that the centrist wing of the party never wanted a $15 minimum wage, for example. And that was excluded in this recent bill. So you've got a bill that was passed entirely by Democrats. No Republican votes were needed, or particularly sought. So why would you exclude that from the bill? They have their scapegoats to explain why they don't pass that, but the bottom line is, if you win an election, immediately after, there's a ton of goodwill to pass any policy the president puts forward. But $15 minimum wage is gone now. It's not going to happen. And if you don't follow U.S. politics, and even if you do, this is difficult to understand for a lot of people. But we have a process called the filibuster in place, which means the minority party has a possibility of holding up any vote. They can stall any vote they want by simply using the filibuster. It used to mean in the old days that you get up and speak and just waste time for endlessly. So they would read Dr. Seuss books, whatever they could come up to stall time. But now they don't even have to do that. They just have to check a box that says we're using our filibuster. But to get around that, there's a process called budget reconciliation available one time per year that you can use for budget matters. And that's how this bill was passed. So because when you use that process, you only need a simple majority of 51 votes. So what does this mean? This means that one time per year, the Democrats can use this process to pass any legislation they want on their own. Beyond this, they're never going to pass any legislation because you would need 60 votes instead of 51. So they would always need to reach out to 9 Republicans for any legislation they want to pass going forward for the rest of the year. So this was their opportunity to fight hard for a $15 minimum wage. Reports are that Joe Biden didn't even meet with the senators that claimed to be opposed to the minimum wage. 8 Democrats voted against it. 7 of them ran on raising the minimum wage. So you've got a clear case of what they said before the election and after the election, and it's not going to pay off in the midterms. This is the problem, as always.
There was also, just based on what you just said to me about the system there, because that's something that I've learned tonight. Does that mean there was an opportunity? So it's quite unusual. I think it's unusual in politics, but in the United States, it appears that you can create a bill that's supposed to be about X, but nearly every senator will get a little thing that they want in it, which may have, so building an FBI building or new upgrade of an FBI in the middle of a pandemic relief bill, as an example, things like that.
Right.
So they seem to build this concoction, this Frankenstein type of monster. Are you saying there was an opportunity for Biden and his clique to actually create a massive bill, to use this once a year opportunity to create a massive bill with lots of different progressive promises that they made in it, which may be very, and then
right.
So it isn't just about a clause in a bill. This once a year thing could be used for a large bill that contain many, many different provisions.
Right, and normally I would agree with you that it's preferable to pass just a standalone bill on the issue, but that's not the way politics works in the United States. We call it pork, where they add things that the senators want for their own state. Pet projects for states get added, and a lot of that negotiation is how bills get passed. But due to the gridlock in Washington right now, it's clear to anybody that follows U.S. politics closely that nothing is going to get a Republican vote that the Democrats put forward. So because of that, there's no chance of a standalone bill passing, because the filibuster exists where the other party, the minority party, can always object. And once they object, it takes 60 votes to overcome the filibuster, which means you have to have 9 votes of the minority party saying they want to stop their own filibuster. So this was our one opportunity per year to do a big bill. So they could have gotten almost anything in the bill. There are some restrictions in the process that this was their excuse for not adding the 15-minute minimum wage, for example. That there's a budget parliamentarian that says it breaks a traditional rule, essentially, the Byrd Amendment. So that was their excuse. But the way our Senate rules work, the parliamentarian is actually making a suggestion of process to the Democratic Party leader of the Senate, who is Kamala Harris. So the vice president herself could have overruled that rule, and then we would have had 15 minimum wage included in the bill. But so you're right. I mean, this was our one chance to do a big bill. And there won't be another. Luckily, this year, there's another opportunity in September for the same thing, because this process of budget reconciliation was not used last year. So this bill was on the last bill. But there are lots of things like the Voting Rights Act that need to get passed. Republicans are trying to gerrymander and change a lot of the voting rules in the states that will clearly disenfranchise a lot of Democratic voters, and it's their only shot of winning is to changing a lot of those rules. So that alone is going to put a lot of pressure to remove the filibuster.
But there were so many commitments made. We've mentioned two. We've mentioned the $15 minimum wage. We've mentioned the $2,000 checks. But there was also, if not solid commitments, there was very intimate tangos with the likes of student debt and the elimination of student debt, with the Green New Deal. He may not have said I'm accepting the Green New Deal, but he said I'm going to make so many progressive changes in that direction. And within the second week, I think, of his inauguration, he was signing off on the opening up of new exploration areas for gas and oil. So in terms of the list of disappointments, is there what's the 5 most important things from the progressive Democratic point of view that needs to happen that appear right now to be a disappointment?
Right. Well, the biggest disappointment wasn't a campaign pledge, but I just want to mention it real quick. Medicare for all is the number one issue for progressives. And to his credit, he did not run on passing Medicare for all. So he's not going to break that pledge. But, you know.
But he did have the public option. He did run on that, and he seemed to be even backtracking on that.
He's already backing off on the public option. So if you want to look at his health plan in the middle of a pandemic, when a record number of American people lost their jobs, and in our country, your health care is tied to your jobs. That's our healthcare system. You need employment, and your employment gives you health care. If you work, a minimum of usually 35 hours a week, usually 40 even. So if you lose your job in this country, you are offered what's called COBRA. And COBRA basically makes you pay all of the fees that were being picked up by your employer to pay for your health care, along with your own fees. So typically a single person is paying like $400 or $500 a month for their health care, along with the supplement that your employers are paying for, which is $1,000, let's just say. So that's $1,400 a month. So his solution is to expand that program. So that means the government is going to pick up more of that fee for the people that lost their jobs, which is an outrageous fee. Okay. It's the most costly, ineffective, inexpensive healthcare system in the world. And Joe Biden's plan in the pandemic is to expand that system, which is essentially taking money that everyone pays. It's not really tax money, because that's a whole other issue. I won't get into that, but it's taking government money and handing it over to the insurance companies, which are huge campaign donors to both parties. So instead of fixing the system and implementing something like Medicare for all, which for the same price of our current system would give you dental full coverage, no copays, no deductibles. I mean, it's clearly a better system, but to not fight for that during a pandemic, when the progressive wing of the party has been advocating for that for a long time, is really a disservice, and it makes it clear where he stands to a lot of people.
It would appear that everything has to be passed through the pork machine, the corporate element, before it's allowed to. It can't be anything good for the sake of itself. The goodness in itself is a word. It seems to have to go through that. Just to focus in on some of these questions, because I can get relayed as well. Do you think there's any shared values between? The media find it very easy to label groups of people and individuals and say this is an individual, this group is left, far right or far left. And I've often found, when I've spoken to people on a one-to-one basis, that they actually share a lot of commonalities, particularly in terms of economic outlook. So, for instance, when they say to somebody, for instance, what do you think of the idea of the pension for somebody, a state pension, which is just a standard thing over here in the EU, a state pension for people over the age of 65 or 66. Nobody argues against it. It's just taken for granted. And there's an understanding that when it's not a handout, you've paid into that system through your whole life. And so this is what you're getting back. What do you think about a healthcare system? Will you pay in through your taxation? So you get all that. Now in Ireland, I have to say, we've got a private system here too. We've got a public system for the unemployed, but for the employed who are on medium to okay wages, it's a private system. So just to let you know, I know a lot of people bullshit in the US about Europe and that, but it's not exactly it. Used to be better, but as over the last 20 years, it's been pulled very much to the corporate end of things as well. But just in terms of what are there any similarities in your mind, or have you seen similarities between people who are described by the media as far left and far right? And are the differences and similarities so grand that they shouldn't talk? There's this element now that on both sides they accuse, if you talk to somebody of the alleged opposing side, you'll be accused of being a facilitator. So do you have those issues over in the US?
Yeah, there's definitely a real divide on a lot of the social issues, but when you break it down to economic issues, and this is the way the Democratic Party needs to approach a lot of the people on the right. We were just talking about Medicare for all. Medicare for all is supported by a majority of Republicans. And you wouldn't, if you watch mainstream media, CNN, MSNBC, the constant narrative is that we are, Trumpers are just radical right nut jobs, gun loving, whatever. But everybody understands how screwed up our healthcare system is. So, and the media's narrative constantly is that Medicare for all is a bad thing for people. And yet you still, breaking through all of that, you've got a majority of Republicans and over 70% of people in general supporting Medicare for all. So, the social economic issues that hit home are clear to people. People on the right understand how bad our healthcare system is. So, reaching them through things like healthcare, the stimulus payments. People understand the need for stimulus payments.
Do you think it's a means to keep people divided by a particular focus on these social issues as opposed to the sharedness of how even economics itself creates the social divisions that are there in many respects? Do you think that that's a purposeful thing, or is it just the way of open free capitalism? Or
I mean, I would say it's a way to preserve our current system, which is essentially what the media is out to do. The media and both parties are happy to keep our current system as it is. If you focus on these things like social issues, like this week in the United States, the Republican Party is focusing on Democrats. It's not even a real thing, but Democrats trying to censor the Dr. Seuss books because some of the early Dr. Seuss books had a lot of Nazi stuff in it. But Democrats didn't do that. The publisher did it. But this is red meat to their base on the right. So if you're on Fox News and you're appealing to the people on the right, you can keep them focused on that issue. You can keep them focused on the left always out to censor them and ban Christmas and other nonsense that they.
And I noticed on CNN and MSNBC and things like that, the dramatization and the exaggeration with the purpose to polarize. I think the exaggeration, both on when they speak about people from the Republican Party too, there's just this hatred. But I'm trying to establish, is there a potential for a third way here? Because, and the reason I'm interested as an Irish person is that I noticed that American politics, whether we like it or not, seeps into Irish politics. And what the MO of US politics I see being reflected a couple of years later in Ireland. And in that context, it's a real concern to me, and I'm sure to our viewers. Is there a third way here where people can be united from, not everybody from the left or right, but enough to be able to find some sense in what is becoming a worse and a worse maelstrom from what I can see? There's less and less real discussion and real debate with the intention of coming to shared solutions to problems, if you get me. It's more about competition.
Yeah, I think it's starting to happen here. Trust in the mainstream media is at an all-time low here. People realize that they, in the last two election cycles, they had a choice of, it was two of the least popular candidates in history for each party. So it was voting against the other guy both times. You take and you see that is reflected in people. What kind of system could bring about somebody like Trump as well? So there is a general distrust that's growing more and more. You've also got young people that don't use CNN and MSNBC as their main source of media as much as they used to. They're not glued to their TV. They're not subject to the same sort of propaganda and constant messaging. So that's creating a little space for pushback against these things. The problem is we have a two-party system where you're always, it's one or the other. You need to vote for either Trump or you have to vote for Biden.
This is how the 2016 option, there was a third way, and the fact that me in Ireland can remember her name, Jill Stein, I'm not saying that she was the ideal option, but the fact that I can remember her name suggests that there's a glimmer of hope. There's 4 years to work on something,
Right, there is, and to that effect, my main effort right now is pushing something called national ranked choice voting, which the reason people don't vote for people like Jill Stein as much as they would is they're afraid if she doesn't win, then that's a vote that essentially goes to Trump, because you're not picking, it's just whoever has the most votes at the end of the day. With ranked choice voting, if one of the top candidates if the top candidate doesn't have 50% of the vote or more, your first vote gets thrown out. Whoever's got the least votes gets thrown out. So say we had Jill Stein, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden on the ticket, you could vote for Jill Stein. And if nobody else had 50% of the vote, well, your first vote gets eliminated. And who was your second vote?
Okay, your second vote. We have that here. It's called proportional representation, but we're still stuck with a load of donkeys.
Right.
And these people get nominated. How do these people, as an example, we've got ministers in government who didn't get elected till the 11th count, and yet they're still
unpopular.
And they're ministers, because once they got across the line, even though they were the dregs, once they got across the line, they could be picked as a minister anyway, technically, but they could morally be picked as a minister. So sometimes I think does it take more than just that kind of systemic change? I fully agree. Proportional representation does get minorities and other people represented more, but at the same time, there's something deeper I think needs to happen. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, so I've always been an advocate for the always possible approach. So I call it the inside out strategy. We try to reform the Democratic Party from within. So I support the people within the party that run as progressives and try to change the rules internally. And there's some signs of that happening. So, like, for example, a lot of Democratic Socialists, they call them, but they're called DSA members here. They basically just this week took over the Democratic Party in Nevada through local elections. So that's just one state. But I'm in California, which has we're one of the two biggest states as far as elections go, electoral votes for the presidency. And we have been close to taking over the Democratic Party in California, the progressive wing, which, should that ever happen, would be a huge swing, because economically we have a huge impact. We can throw our weight around on the general national Democratic Party. So that's one way.
You have Silicon Valley, am I right there?
Yeah, Silicon Valley, exactly. So, should that ever happen, we have a lot of power within the party. But there are a lot of mechanisms to stop us from ever doing that in place.
Well, if you look what happened with Jeremy Corbyn and the Momentum campaign, in which they successfully took over the leadership of the Labour Party. But then out of this curveball came of anti-Semitic smears and accusations, which is ridiculous. He's the most anti-Semitic person you could meet. And it destroyed him. And they won in the end. And now they've got this sanitized, you might call, we'd say in Ireland, the sanitized Dublin 4 character, who is a barrister, who's running the Labour Party now. And I can see it happening in the United States. I can see it, the anti-Semitism thing working even more in the United States.
Those smears work it's a pattern they've figured out that works, and they try to use it everywhere. I mean, they tried to label Bernie Sanders, a Jewish man, anti-Semitic. So there's no limit to what they will try. I mean, like just today, I don't know if you've seen Twitter, but a big propagandist account was exposed.
As being BBC and Reuters working together, paying and seeking out and promoting journalists in countries that they want to interfere in the politics. Yeah, and the name of the company behind that was, I can't recall now, Pat, what was that?
I know it had American in the title, of course, but there, there's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of propaganda, and I think younger generations are more and more in tune to it, less susceptible to it, and that gives us some hope. Couple that with people working within the party trying to change the rules. Even if we're not able to directly change the party. Oh, I think I lost. There are so many people aware of it that at some point the party has to cater a little bit to our wing, even against their best interest, which, that gets us incremental change, but it doesn't get us dramatic change that we need. It doesn't doesn't get us enough change to really fight climate change like we need to, or to address half the problems, in this country with poverty and lack of health care and other issues.
Well, it comes back to the original question: is there a potential for a third way over the next 4 years? People like you who are key to making that decision, because you're in the Dems at the moment, the ruling party. You are the point of the arrow of the progressive movement that got the party there in the first place. You seem sorely disappointed with so many others. If anybody knows of the potential there for a third way, it would be people like yourself.
Yeah. So what I mean, there's lots of things we're focusing on. One of them is you've got a lot of progressives that we fought hard tooth and nail to get elected. They call them the Squad, AOC, that progressive part of the party within the Democratic Party. A lot of us are pushing them to act like the Tea Party did 15 years ago, use their vote as a block. So you've got these 7 people in the House who have the potential to hold up any legislation they want for whatever they want included in it.
But they don't seem to be willing to do it, from what I can see.
Right. So that's the struggle. And their argument is that they're fighting for incremental progress within the party, small gains behind closed doors. And they are, they do call out a lot of things happening within the party that we don't like. But, we elected them to power to shine a light on what needs to be changed and call out names and to take on directly people within the party, the corruption within the party. And they're not willing to do that at this point. At this point, they're playing nice with the party as a way to gain power. And
by right, you guys should be holding them back, saying, no, hold on, don't be so rough with them. But instead, you're having to push them in the door, as it were.
Right, and that's exactly the fight. And in some ways, that's split my wing of the party. So even the progressive wing, you got people that don't want us to criticize them as hard as we are. And I err on the side of, every politician should be criticized. They're going to do as little as they can, or they're not going to fight as hard as they need to if they don't know they won't possibly lose their seat if they don't represent us the way we want them to.
Just because we're running out of time, Pat, cancel culture, it's a phrase that's more American than European. But what I mean by cancel culture is the idea that if we can couch people's opinions as extreme, we can cancel them from having a presence online, as it were. It's happened to Donald Trump and a lot of his supporters. What do you think about it yourself? Do you support cancel culture? Is it a problem? Is it a double-edged sword?
I think it's something that's being weaponized. I don't think it's really the problem it's made out to be. I think it's going to be used as an excuse to cancel a lot of. It's an issue of censorship. It gives them permission to censor accounts. Like, in 2016, Twitter suppressed almost half of the hashtag DNC leaks, which was about the WikiLeaks exposing the Democratic Party leaks, basically Hillary's emails and that sort of stuff. It was actually John Podesta, the head of the Democratic Party. But Twitter just flat out suppressed half of them, didn't show them to the public. And so they use censorship, they use this. I mean, that's just one wing of it. But so take the division in the party over the Squad pushing hard for progressive issues. The progressive wing wanted the Squad, the Democrats that are the far left, like myself, we wanted them to not vote for Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House until she promised to bring Medicare for All, the healthcare plan we want, to a vote in
what
the
was
House.
That there's a name on that campaign, wasn't there? Jimmy Dore was as well, the comedian.
So it was called #Force the Vote.
Yeah.
It was basically, she could never win her seat that she has now as Speaker of the House. She couldn't win it again unless she had these people's votes. So she needed their votes. So we thought this is a great opportunity to force this vote on Medicare for All, because in the middle of a pandemic, let's see who really wants to vote against reforming our healthcare system. It's an important step. But we can't even get the vote on the floor because the speaker controls what policy gets debated and legislated. So that was a divide on the left. Anyway, so bring it back to the force the vote issue. Jimmy Dore is sort of a controversial figure on the left for a number of reasons. But the idea was sound. It's just that he became one of the most vocal proponents of force the vote. So they weaponized everything that Jimmy Dore had ever done to try to cancel Jimmy Dore, and by extension, people pushing for force the vote, because he became a front and center figure on this issue. So that was cancel culture being weaponized specifically to kill an issue like force the vote for Medicare for all. And it was pushed by all the propagandists. It was pushed, it made.
I think Jimmy Dore's been better than ever as a result.
Right. I mean, it's great, but they can do that with any issue. So now any issue that Jimmy Dore supports, it can be weaponized. Well, Jimmy Dore is a toxic figure. Look what happened with force the vote.
He's an angry man. Well, maybe he's got a reason to be angry,
If you're not angry now, what are you doing in politics on the left? You should be angry as hell. So.
Pat, I'm going to call it, is there any, just in terms of your predictions, and I know this wasn't the question I sent you, and maybe it's a final question. What's your predictions over the next 3 3/4 years in terms of Biden and where we're going from here? You said that in 2 years' time there are midterm votes. Where do you think this is all going to lead?
Right. So in the midterms, I think a lot of it comes down to the COVID response and how we come out of this. But as it stands, Democrats will probably lose the Senate. It's typical the party that wins ends up losing seats in the midterms. So it's such a thin majority. And to be honest, I think Democrats would prefer not to have to own all the houses, Senate, Congress, presidency, because then they're under a lot of pressure to actually pass progressive legislation that their donors really don't want. So I suspect the Democrats lose a seat or two in the midterms, which means nothing can pass. We'll never be able to pass any legislation 2 years from now. 3 years from now, I think you've got Joe Biden will probably resign or leave office for some particular reason.
Something like that.
Yeah, I mean,
he is quite feeble looking, and I'm not to say he is quite.
Yeah, I mean, look, he shouldn't be in this position now. But the point is, they know he won't run in a second term. But if he leaves in his third year, Kamala Harris becomes the president, and then it would be up to Democrats to primary Kamala Harris, which would be a tough fight. So I really believe, 3 years from now, you're looking at Kamala Harris as the president.
Is Bernie too old to stay involved at a high level?
He won't be running again. Yeah. I don't think so.
Yeah, but he does seem to have inspired, though. I have even noted a bit of disappointment with Bernie Sanders in some progressive corners over the last while. And some people, I do notice, whether it's left or right, when people are disappointed, they can throw quite harsh accusations at times and forget about all the good things that have been done as well. Pat Cote, thanks for joining us this evening, or this morning in my case. I hope to have you back on as things develop in the United States over the next while. Is there anything you'd like to finish with? Do you have any relations? You're Pat. Do you have any relations in Ireland at all?
I wish I could pinpoint where, but I'm a Patrick Michael and I've got some Irish in me. So there is some.
There's a lot of Patrick and Michaels around the place.
Yeah, so I did. If you go to my website, savageandpat.com, I wrote 2 satire books. If you want to read about politics in a painless way, it kind of explains some of the stuff going on there. But,
brilliant. Okay. Yeah. Listen, Pat. We're going to finish recording now. I'll have a chat afterwards with you as well. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Great to be here. Thank you.
That was Pat Cote from the Democratic Party in California in the United States with what I think is some great insight into what is happening in the Democratic Party at the moment. It looks like after all the hullabaloo over the elections, there's going to be very little change over the next 4 years. That's the end of the show for this evening, folks. I promise you next week we'll be back in a proper studio setting. We just had some connectivity problems over the last week. Next week, we're going to be talking about what is hard left, what is hard right, and are we being labelled and are we being put into corners where we don't belong in terms of the political spectrum in Ireland? And does the hard left and the hard right, as the media described them, do they have more in common than we might think? Join me next week on Double Down at the Irish Inquiry on Thursday at 9 p.m. Thanks for tuning in, folks.